Welcome. Take a slow breath and settle into the stillness of now. Let the noise of the present world drift gently away as we step softly into another time, a place shaped not by haste or screens, but by traditions, incense, and handwritten wisdom. Tonight we journey far, both across distance and through centuries, to explore a way of life rooted in quiet discipline, family honor, and enduring philosophies. We're going back to ancient China. But this isn't the story of emperors or battles. This is the story of what it was really like to grow up there. What it meant to be a child in a world built not for play, but for duty. A world where your very first words might be Confucian maxims. And where your worth was measured not in toys or dreams, but in silence, obedience, and perfect handwriting. As we move gently through the shadows of history, you'll hear stories of childhoods shaped by ink, stone, family altars, and expectations that began long before you could even understand them. We'll walk you through the corridors of a typical household, past the sleeping mats and rice bowls. We'll listen to the scratching of brushes on bamboo slips. And we'll uncover the unseen pressures behind every bow, every recitation, every quiet glance. So now, close your eyes if you like. Let the rhythm of the past cradle you, and drift with us into the first part of our journey. Why ancient Chinese kids started studying before they could read. Imagine yourself in a modest courtyard house, the kind built with wooden beams and earthen walls, its roof tiles gently clicking in the wind. The sun has only just risen over the tiled rooftops of a small village in the Han Dynasty, and already you're kneeling on a woven mat. You're only 4 years old, perhaps 5, and your small hands are pressed together respectfully. In front of you, your father clears his throat. He holds a bamboo scroll etched with familiar characters. You don't know what they mean, not yet, but you've heard the words over and over. The master said, "A youth, when at home, should be filial and abroad, respectful to his elders." You repeat it after him, stumbling slightly. He corrects you, calmly, but firmly. Again and again. This is your morning. This is your beginning. In ancient China, childhood wasn't framed as a time of discovery or whimsy. It was the preparation phase, a training ground. Children, especially boys, were introduced to formal instruction as early as 3 or 4 years old, particularly in literate or merchant families, not because they could understand the texts, but because early memorization was considered a sign of good moral potential. Education began long before comprehension. At its heart was Confucianism, not just a philosophy, but a code for living, speaking, and even thinking. The Analects of Confucius, the classic of filial piety, and the Book of Rites were repeated like mantras, not for entertainment, not for expression, but for shaping the soul. There were no picture books, no colored pencils. Instead, you might practice characters by tracing them in sand or ash with a stick, over and over again. For families that could afford a private tutor, there was a small wooden desk, a brush, a ceramic ink pot. But for many, learning took place outside, in whatever space was available, knees in the dirt, eyes squinting at carved slips of bamboo. The repetition was relentless, but soothing in its own way. The same passage, the same gestures, the same bowed head, each motion anchored to the idea of harmony, of hierarchy, of your place within the family and society. Not all families, of course, could offer this kind of schooling. In rural areas, most children labored instead of learning. But even there, under the thatched roof of a simple hut, Confucian ideals echoed in lullabies and scoldings. A child was not raised to ask, why? They were raised to ask, how can I do better? Mothers played a quiet but powerful role. Though not usually permitted to teach in formal ways, they were often the ones who introduced children to the first rhythms of ritual, folding hands, bowing to ancestors, listening without interrupting. A gentle tug of the sleeve could mean, speak less. A look from across the room could mean, you've brought shame. Everything mattered. posture, tone, pace. There was no such thing as just a child being a child. You were a mirror of your family, and your earliest steps in the world were watched and weighed. Evenings came quietly, oil lamps flickered behind oiled parchment screens, and under that dim golden light, you practiced again. Your father corrected your tones. Your mother coaxed you into remembering the next line. Outside, crickets chirped in the warm dusk. Inside, your voice recited the wisdom of centuries. When parents are alive, one must not travel far. You may not know what the words mean, but they'll stay with you, whispered in your sleep like a second heartbeat. In this world, childhood wasn't carefree. It was careful. But within that care, there was also rhythm, structure, a quiet comfort in knowing your path, even if you had no choice in it. And as we leave this small home behind, we take with us the sound of a child's voice, repeating words written 1,000 years before. Words that were meant to shape not just a life, but an entire civilization. Let us now move forward to explore what came after those early years, when the quiet repetitions gave way to structured expectations. And even the simplest games had meanings far beyond play. Play? Not really. What childhood fun looked like in the Han Dynasty. Let's now shift our focus, gently, towards something that might feel more familiar. The world of play. The laughter of children, small games in shaded courtyards, toys carved from wood or bone. You might expect, or even hope, that ancient childhoods offered occasional respite from discipline and structure. And indeed, there was play in ancient China, but it wasn't always spontaneous. It wasn't always joyful, and it rarely stood apart from learning, social order, or the quiet lessons of tradition. Imagine yourself in that same village courtyard, now a little older, perhaps 7 or 8. The morning's lessons are done. The sun is warmer now, casting patterned shadows through woven reed screens. You slip outside, barefoot, on sun-warmed earth, and join your siblings or cousins under a ginkgo tree. Your toys are simple, perhaps a small clay ox on wheels, shaped by hand and painted with faded red pigment, perhaps a spinning top made of stone, wood, or bronze, or maybe a set of Jianzi, an early version of shuttlecock, played by kicking a feathered object to keep it aloft. No rackets, no court, just coordination, breath, and balance. These games are not noisy. They are not wild. The rhythm of childhood here is subdued, measured, a continuation of the day's expectations, not a break from them. In wealthier homes, there were more refined amusements. Children of the elite might play board games like Liubo, an ancient, now lost strategy game involving dice, tokens, and symbolic moves. The exact rules have vanished, but what remains is clear. It wasn't meant to be thrilling. It was thoughtful, controlled. Other favored pastimes included miniature archery contests with toy bows, gentle wrestling, and balance games. But always, always, under the watchful eyes of elders. A misstep could lead to scolding. A loud laugh might be shushed. Fun was permitted, but only within the rules. Even group games held deeper meanings. One popular children's song game involved passing a pebble behind backs, chanting lines of old poems. The rhythm was hypnotic, the verses often ancient, drawn from folklore or moral tales. Lose your place in the chant, and you'd face teasing or quiet disapproval. Many of these games, too, were designed not just for fun, but for training. Boys were encouraged to play hunting games with slings or nets, not to explore nature, but to prepare for potential future roles in governance, protection, or ritual. Girls were taught embroidery and calligraphy even as toddlers, often under the guise of leisure, though it was anything but. Even the dolls carried meaning. Clay figurines often resembled deities or ancestors, meant to be handled with care, not played with freely. A child knocking one over might be told gently to bow and apologize. There were moments of delight, of course. Lantern festivals offered paper lamps to carry, New Year's gave children red pouches with coins, sweets, or even simple charms. Kites made from silk and bamboo soared in the spring air, often shaped like birds, butterflies, or dragons. Their tails whispered in the breeze, and the sky, just for a moment, felt like it belonged to the child below. But even these joys were not chaotic. They followed patterns, cultural rhythms passed down like recipes or songs. Everything had a time, a place, a boundary. And what of laughter? It was there, soft, restrained, polite. A chuckle at a riddle, a smile shared behind a hand. But belly laughter, loud and unbridled, that belonged to fools, not the filial. In the countryside, for poorer children, play looked different, less shaped by Confucian ideals, more tied to nature and chores. A girl might twirl a string around a chicken's leg to watch it dance. A boy might race a leaf boat in an irrigation channel, listening for frogs among the reeds. These were fleeting moments, in between gathering firewood, pounding grain, or caring for siblings. Yet still, there was a kind of joy in them, quiet, rooted, earthbound. You see, play in ancient China wasn't absent, but it was different, structured, symbolic, and always within the current of culture. Fun was never just fun, it was practice, it was patience, it was preparation for the long, narrow path ahead. And as we leave these playing children behind, their shadows lengthening on the earth, we step into deeper waters, past the visible, into the symbolic, to understand the quiet expectations that surrounded them, not just in life, but in belief, in ritual, in the unseen world. Let us now turn our gaze to tradition and mystery, to the philosophies, rituals, and cultural threads that shaped the soul of ancient Chinese childhood. Shame, filial piety, and the daily pressure to be perfect. Now that we've walked through Kaozen, through the quiet games and gentle rituals of daily life, it's time to pause and listen to something deeper. Not a sound exactly, but a presence, a pressure, so constant and so quiet that it became the very air a child breathed. In ancient China, growing up wasn't just about obedience, it was about filial piety, the invisible force that guided every gesture, every decision, every heartbeat. This idea, known as Xiao, in Chinese, was the backbone of Confucian teaching. It didn't simply mean loving your parents. It meant honoring them in every thought. It meant putting family above self. It meant keeping your voice low, your eyes down, and your ambitions carefully folded inside. Imagine yourself as a 10-year-old, seated at the family altar. Your knees ache from kneeling, but you say nothing. Before you, an incense stick curls upward, its smoke twisting into the still air. You recite your family lineage, names memorized like sacred poetry, grandparents, great-grandparents, names you never knew, but must never forget. Your grandfather watches from behind. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. You already know the rules. In ancient Chinese households, hierarchy was absolute. The father's word was final. The mother enforced order. Siblings obeyed birth order, and younger children deferred to older ones, even if only by minutes. To disobey, even in private, was not just seen as misbehavior. It was dishonor. There was no time out, no quiet conversation behind closed doors. Instead, there was shame. Slow, creeping silence that fell over the family. A withdrawn glance. A missed meal. A removal from the inner circle. In some households, small punishments were ritualized. A child might be made to kneel in a corner for an hour, not as a spectacle, but as a reflection. To kneel meant to consider your failure and your family's disappointment. But shame wasn't always external. It was internalized early, deep, and silently. Boys were expected to uphold the family name, to become scholars, bureaucrats, or respectable craftsmen. Their success, or failure, reflected on every ancestor. Girls were raised for obedience and sacrifice. Their honor was bound to modesty. Their silence was praised. To be too outspoken, too curious, or too bold was to risk being called unfilial, and in some cases, unmarriageable. In both cases, perfection wasn't praised. It was assumed. Consider this. A child receives top marks from his tutor. He returns home, beaming, holding the bamboo scroll tight in his hands. His father nods. Once. His mother says, "Do even better next time." This was not cruelty. This was tradition. Because, in a world shaped by hierarchy and harmony, praise could breed pride, and pride was dangerous. Rituals reinforced the weight of expectation. Each morning, children greeted their parents with bows, not hugs. On holidays, they served tea in ceremonial order, down to the angle of the wrist. Even grief had rules. When a grandparent passed, a child might wear coarse mourning clothes for months, sleeping on a mat to show sorrow properly. Joy was allowed, but always modest. Pain was endured, but never loud. And yet, beneath this quiet pressure, there was love. Not in the form of affection as we might define it today, but in structure, in sacrifice. A father waking early to prepare ink, a mother weaving slippers by lamplight, an older sibling reciting passages late into the night so the younger might listen and learn. There was tenderness in shared silence, devotion in repetition, and a fierce, invisible pride that pulsed beneath every unsaid word. To grow up in ancient China was to grow into a shape long predetermined, like water poured into a mold carved generations ago. And for most, this was not questioned. It was honored. But what happened to those who stumbled? Those who defied? Those who, despite their efforts, could not live up to the standard? The shame was often lifelong. A son who failed the imperial exam might live with his parents until old age, haunted by the feeling that he had not just failed himself, but disgraced the entire family line. A daughter who acted improperly might never marry, or be quietly sent to live with distant relatives, her name avoided at gatherings. And yet there were exceptions. Moments of quiet rebellion, a girl who insisted on learning to read, a boy who chose poetry over law. But such stories were whispered, and even centuries later, they still carry the hush of secret hope. As we leave this space, shaped by duty and invisible weight, let the idea of Xiao linger with you, not as a burden, but as a lens, a way to understand how a culture shaped its children, not just for the present, but for eternity, through names, through deeds, through reverence. Now in the final stretch of our journey, we'll explore what happened when childhood ended, when young ones grew tall and were called upon to carry the family forward, or sometimes carry its failure. Let us move now to the final part of our story. What happened if you failed, or worse, excelled? Now, the child has grown. The rituals are familiar. The lines of Confucius no longer need to be recited. They are etched into memory, as constant as breath. And yet, the weight of those words has only grown heavier. We've followed this child from ink-smeared fingers and whispered recitations, through disciplined games and invisible shame. Now we arrive at the threshold, the moment when childhood ends, and judgment begins. Because in ancient China, growing up wasn't simply about maturity. It was about becoming useful, becoming valuable, becoming, in the eyes of your family, your neighbors, your ancestors, worthy. And that worth, it was tested, publicly, repeatedly, and mercilessly. For boys, the path to honor was narrow and steep, the imperial examination system. Imagine yourself at 13 or 14. You've studied for nearly a decade, every day filled with ink, posture, repetition. Now seated on a wooden bench in a government building, you are given a scroll. The exam before you is not multiple choice. It is poetry, philosophy, governance. You must compose essays, recite verses, reference the classics. It is not just about knowledge. It is about rhythm, tone, and submission to the established order. The test may last for days. There is no food provided, no comfort. Some bring chamber pots, some faint from exhaustion, some never finish. And yet, the reward, if passed, is immense. A place in the bureaucracy, a title, a future of robes, ink, and respect. For your family, it is salvation. For your ancestors, vindication. For your village, pride. But only one in hundreds may pass. And if you fail, there is no ceremony for failure, no gentle next time. You return home, head bowed. Your neighbors lower their eyes. Your father says little. Your mother says even less. You're not disowned, but you are diminished. Many will try again, some for decades. Others will give up, become clerks, tutors, farmers, drifting through a life quietly marked by almost. Failure here is not a moment. It is a shadow. And what of those who succeeded? It may seem odd, but in some ways, excellence was its own kind of burden. To pass the exams meant being pulled away from your village, your family, your past. You might be posted in a distant province, alone, scrutinized, held to impossible standards. You were now the state's servant. Every misstep could be fatal. One wrong word in a report, one misjudged decision, and you could lose everything, or worse, be imprisoned. And in some rare cases, excellence led to envy. Rival scholars, suspicious elders, even your own family might grow distant, awed by your success, but unsure how to treat you now. You'd become something else. A vessel for the state's ideals. No longer a son. Not quite yet a man. For girls, the outcomes were different, and perhaps quieter, but no less complex. A daughter's path was not marked by exams, but by marriage. If she was modest, graceful, and well-trained in domestic arts, she might marry well, into a respected family with a secure dowry and structured life. But if she showed too much independence, if her embroidery was clumsy, if she lacked charm or discipline, she might remain at home far longer than intended, or be married off to a distant village, to a family less prosperous, or, if the family was wealthy, sent into a nunnery, a quiet retirement cloaked in incense and solitude. There were exceptions, of course. Some women became poets, philosophers, even political advisors in rare dynastic courts, but they were anomalies, stories passed down with wonder and disbelief. There were also those who fell through the cracks, the sons who failed and never married, the daughters who became caretakers for aging parents, the orphaned, the ill, the disabled, each navigating life within a structure that rarely bent. And yet, there was resilience. In every village there were storytellers, midwives, herbalists, laborers whose hands carried wisdom not taught in books. Not all success came through ink. Some came through steadiness, through humility, through surviving quietly in a world of sharp expectations. As the years passed, even the most promising youth grew old. A former scholar returned to his village to teach. A mother taught her granddaughters the strokes of calligraphy. And once again, in the dimming light of evening, a child knelt beside the family altar, repeating the very words once whispered to them. The master said, "In serving your parents, remonstrate gently." The circle began again. In ancient China, childhood never truly ended. It transformed, from quiet lessons to quiet burdens, from play with purpose to purpose without pause, and in the end, those who grew up in that world carried it with them always, in posture, in memory, in silence. Now, as our journey draws to a close, let us step back once more and reflect. And now, the incense has burned low. The oil lamp flickers once, then fades. The voices have grown still. We have walked a long path tonight, through narrow alleys and wide courtyards, past wooden writing desks and paper-thin walls, through the hush of temples and the quiet tension of childhood lessons. We've seen how children in ancient China lived, not in the bright hues of fantasy or legend, but in the muted tones of repetition, expectation, and deep cultural roots. From the very first steps, they were guided not by dreams of personal glory, but by an ancient code written in the rhythms of the Analects, in the glances of elders, in the invisible thread that bound each child to every generation before. There were joys, yes, small ones, a paper kite soaring briefly into the wind, a perfect calligraphy stroke praised with a quiet nod, the weight of a coin in a red envelope. And there were struggles, subtle, constant, to be enough, to not bring shame, to fit into a mold carved centuries before your birth. And now, here you are, in your own time, in your own world. Your room may be still, your breath slower. The glow of a screen fades gently beside you. You are not kneeling on a mat before an ancestor's shrine. You are not reciting the Book of Rites by candlelight, but somewhere, quietly, you carry echoes of that ancient rhythm, a wish to make your parents proud, a pressure to do things just right, a feeling that your story is not just yours, but part of something older. And as your eyes grow heavier and the space between thoughts begins to widen, let that rhythm quiet you. Let the past become soft around the edges. Let the weight of history settle not as a burden, but as a blanket, warm, constant, gentle. The children of ancient China are long asleep. Their voices echo only in the records, the scrolls, and now, in your dreams. You are safe now. You are free to rest. Good night.